technique, strategy that our ancestors have used, but it's being applied in a very contemporary and very modern setting by our guest presenter today, Beata. She'll introduce a little bit more about it, but yeah, I'm excited about this, and thank you for taking the time to attend. Thank you.
Okay, hello everybody. Wiat Gindi Singiti. Good afternoon. I'm Kaylee Warren. I'm the communications coordinator for the Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance. We're honored to be helping Clayton and Tanafa to present these webinars, and really excited that you've joined us today. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, as well as the work of the other organizations who are going to be involved in our presentation today, I'll be sharing everybody's websites and social media handles in the chat for your reference. So to give you an idea here of what our next hour and a half is going to look like, once we wrap up our brief introductions here, we're going to jump right into our presentation for about an hour, and then we'll conclude with a question and answer session and award some door prizes as well. Just so you know, we would encourage you to save any questions that come up during the presentation for the end during our Q&A session. And when we get to that time, we'll let you know when we're going to transition. And then if you could use the Q&A box instead of the chat to ask your questions. We have about 15 minutes or so, maybe a little bit more than that, to have a discussion. And we'll choose the questions that have the most upvotes to ask at that time. And as we mentioned, we have some door prizes to give today. So we will randomly choose 2 people out of those who ask a question today. So a little bit more motivation to share what's on your mind as we move through the presentation. Clayton has generously offered to share some stickers and some food products. So we're really grateful to him for offering that to everybody who has made the time to join us today. And if you do win a door prize, we are going to be in contact with you via email to receive your mailing information. So with that, I'll just hand it back to you, Clayton, to introduce our presenter today. And thank you again, everybody, for joining us.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, their guest presenter is Beata. She's from Santa Clara Pueblo. She also works with a great organization here in northern Mexico, Tewa Women United. And as with most of the other presenters we've had, there were previous participant students of our one of the courses that we offer is called Indigenous Communities, Sustainable Communities Design course. And we've been at it for 24 years. This year be our 25th year. And a lot of great projects have come out of it. And I really have been inspired by Beata's work. And so anyway, she can give you a little bit more information, and this presentation is going to be covering a lot of that. So thank you, everyone, and Beata.
Thank you, Clayton and Kaylee. Biat Gindi, everyone. My name is Beata Tsosie Peña from Hapowinge, Santa Clara Pueblo. I am the program coordinator in the Environmental Health and Justice Program at Tewa Women United. And so the Española Healing Foods Oasis is a project of a lot of the food and seed sovereignty work that we do as part of that program. So I think we're gonna, you can learn more about the organization. You're always welcome to reach out if you have any follow-up questions. This is going to be kind of an overview today of the project, depending on what your interest is. If you're more in the looking at a template for something in your own community, I'm always happy to talk about that with folks. So if there's something you want to go deeper in than what you learn about today, feel free to contact me. And yeah, I'm really happy to be here And yeah, it's just been an honor to be mentored by a lot of the relatives in our Indigenous communities, including Clayton and others. You know, as it's kind of a lifelong journey in reclaiming this ancestral Indigenous technology. So I think we're going to watch a video, kind of an overview of the project. It was a response to a lot of the environmental health and justice impacts that we're facing in our issues and around nuclear colonialism, oil and gas industry, threats to our heirloom seeds, all of those things. You know, the garden has really been a strengths-based approach to responding to those things. So I guess we can go ahead and I'll turn it over to how we're going to watch the video. There is some subtitles, but there's one part that I want to point out. It sounds like the subtitles say swale, but it's really swale, S-W-A-L-E. So if you're watching that part, talking about swales, not soil. So a couple of typos on the subtitles, but just bear with those.
Okay, so I've added the link to the chat for the video that we're going to be viewing right now, and if you'd prefer just to watch that on your own. But I'm going to share my screen and we'll watch this video for about an hour.
Oh, Kaylee, do you want to mention skipping the first few minutes?
Oh, yes, thank you for reminding me. So if you're going to watch on your own, we're going to start at 9 minutes and 23 seconds. But you can definitely afterwards come back and watch the entirety of the video if you would like. Okay, let's see. Colleen, it looks like I'm having some trouble with my audio. Would it be possible for you to play the video?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for your patience, everybody.
You have to stop sharing your screen.
Okay.
Sorry, bear with us here as we figure this out.
So right here we have this was about maybe phase 4 of the garden. And this is, we got a grant from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to make it a pollinator habitat. So all through here we have about 25 fruit trees or beneficial trees or native trees interspersed with pollinator plants, which are wildflowers. We also created these bancos as a way to catch further rainwater runoff. There wasn't much seating in this park, so we wanted to create extra seating. I guess the ideas around thinking about creating a pollinator habitat is that you want things that are in bloom all season long. So things that bloom early in spring, bloom through the summer, things that bloom late in fall, early winter, so that the pollinators all have that source of food throughout the year. Simple sources of water, and also the different spectrum of colors. So you want all the full spectrum of colors because different pollinators are attracted to different colors, and they see things really differently than humans do. So that's what's going on with this whole stretch all the way through the end is lots of wildflowers, and we just saw like some hummingbirds, and they'll be all over the garden. But through here is mostly fruit trees and different wildflowers, some herbs. Here's some white yarrow, which we actually got requests from the birth workers in the community to plant yarrow because of its use in stopping hemorrhaging, heavy blood bleeding. It's good in fever reducing, all kinds of different uses. And you know, feel free to chime in with the chat or whatever if you guys want to contribute your knowledge of this plant. We won't go into too much detail, other than to say that, you know, when we just to start going into our community guidelines for harvesting, is that we always tell the plants thank you for their medicine, tell them what we're going to use them for before we pick them, and just ask permission. Again, we want to switch from culture of violence to culture of peace, and that also means fostering consent whenever possible, even with non-human relations. And yeah, and only picking what you need for yourself, your family, or any elders you're helping to take care of for that season. We also don't pull out the roots of the plant unless you're specifically, maybe I would go to more, unless you specifically need that root for that purpose. But for this site, because it's still getting established, we're asking people not to harvest the roots just yet of things until they spread more. Behind you, you could kind of get that trumpet, red trumpet flower. Hummingbirds really love that one. So that's the trumpet flower. This is some wildflowers. This is the New Mexican sunflower, Mexican hat. Behind us is California poppy. Here's some more yarrow, but it's red. They say the white has the most powerful medicinal properties, but all of it is useful. So this is another feature in the garden. It's a spiral garden, and again, it's built off a water flow that comes down this slope where this cottonwood. It's another drainage point for rainwater that comes down right into this opening of the spiral. And what's really cool about this garden was that it was in collaboration with an artist called Bel Frayeros. And she made some rain oyas, they're called. So rain vessels. It's another example of harvesting rainwater through the use of unglazed clay pots that you put in your garden. It catches the rainwater, and then that water percolates slowly through the garden. So I don't know if you can get up close. I can see, and they go pretty deep. And she actually used words from Nora Naranjo Morris around the top of the vessel. So these are throughout this garden. This year I just put in a lot of seed in the spiral. It was during the quarantine, so we had didn't have a lot of access to plants. So some of this stuff came back from last year, and some of it I put seed in and it came up. So this spiral is new. We just did it this spring. For those of you who've helped with the rock work on the site in the past, you know that this was the site of what we jokingly called the never-ending rock pile, because all the rocks on the slope were put up there by hand or lines of people passing rock up one by one. And we finally got around to digging out the remainder of the rock and turning it into another spiral bed. So that's kind of the nice entrance, having the two spirals coming in, the two cottonwoods. And then again, it's coming off a slope. So, you know, when you're doing a spiral garden, ideally, and sorry about the wind right now, you want this lower wall to be level with the highest point. So it could be a little higher, but we can, you know, if we ever decide we want to mess with more rock again, we could bring some in. But just to keep that in mind, if it's not on a level surface, that your lowermost wall needs to be as high as the tallest point of the water runoff, if you really want to get that catchment. Everything in this garden is also on a drip system. So just while the plants are babies and getting established, it's important that we have that. And yes, a lot of this is based off of indigenous knowledge, but we also believe that using Western technology and indigenous knowledge together is really ideal for the rapid, urgent solutions that we need to find today, to really get these things going. So the drip system in this garden is our utilization of Western knowledge. And again, you know, from a justice perspective, it's not that one is better than the other. It's not that science versus indigenous science is better than the other. They're both equally important. But it's just that right now in these times, they're not in balance, and there really isn't that equity when it comes to indigenous knowledge being given equal validity. So I guess that's what has to get solved with using both. But yeah, there's so much that we could do, and again, sharing that collective knowledge no matter what culture or background you come from. So we're starting to move up onto the slope. What's really cool about this garden is everything is edible, medicinal, herbal, a good companion plant, a soil builder, either spreading that native grasses to hold erosion. And all plants have those benefits. All plants have a purpose, even the weeds. We got like the ragweed and the goat heads that we're always pulling out, but even those, if you wanted to make medicine out of them, you could. So a lot of this stuff is just seed that has been growing on its own and comes back every year. We have these rock berms, which are helping to catch water coming down the slope. There's also a layer of geoju and seed. We did put seed underneath this so that the plants could start to come through the rocks. So everything is seeded or transplanted. And it's just good to know that because it's in a public park, part of the design was we wanted everyone to feel confident that if they found a berry, if they found a fruit, that they know they could eat it, even if they weren't sure on possible ID. So if the kids are running around, you don't have to worry about like, oh, is that poison or not? Everything's edible. So we wanted to really reconnect people with those traditional foods that were wild, that are grown in nature, to remember those plants and just expand our knowledge of food systems and how we can tap into those. And, you know, traditionally, we didn't just grow our food with fields and irrigation. Yes, we did that, but we also took care of places where wild foods grew. And again, that's part of that interdependent relationship that humans have with their environment as indigenous people. And so we knew the places where, the currants grew, or the wild spinach, or the tsimaha, or the berries, and would take care of those places and maybe help them get a little bit extra water, or go and pick those foods for the elders who couldn't really go and gather anymore, you know. And so the plants, they get to know you, get to know people over time. And they really love us and want to be near us. And you'll see that when you go to a place and you start to, there's some plants that you really just get intimate with in a way, in a sense, you know, of how you get to know them. And through the teachings I was taught, like they say if you can know 6 plants really well, that you're an expert on at least six natural plants, you'll be able to survive. So in this garden, we have probably over 250 varieties that you could learn about. We're still in the process of labeling them in 3 different languages. So again, it's this outdoor community education space. We also, every year, we're harvesting the seeds from these plants. So you can see, this is the bee plant, Rocky Mountain bee plant. This was traditionally a food. You can cook it and eat it, boil it and eat it. It's a great pollinator plant, and our potters used to make also a black paint out of this. If you boil it down, it makes these little black cakes that you use like watercolors. So this is, you know, a plant we've been in relation with a long time. Pollinators love it, and so I like it just for that reason. But yeah, it's super nutritious. So up on top there is some wolfberries. Also heard them called Goji Berries of similar variety. Those are a traditional berry that are really ready to pick right now. There's also the piñons, which is a traditional food. You can make dye out of it. All of the plants on this slope were in honor of fiber arts. The levels are kind of for the different color dyes. So down on the bottom is like the blues, the grays. Up here is like maybe yellow, oranges, maybe some reds up top with the cactus flower. Just a note on design also, we didn't make any straight up and down staircases because we wanted people to purposely kind of have to meander through the garden and have to look at all the plants. A lot of times we look for that fastest point from point A to point B, but that's also the least informative. Like sometimes the most knowledge you have to kind of work for a little bit. And just to shout out our landscape architect, Christy Green of Radical in Santa Fe, who was instrumental in this design and who we work very closely with still to this day at this garden. So we're at the top of the slope. This is pretty much our phase 1 area. And we came up here because this is the whole design of the Healing Foods Oasis is based off of our deep love and respect for water as a desert people. And if you go to any ancient gardens in any of these mountaintops and any of these indigenous communities, guarantee you they still have ancient gardens that are still working and harvesting rainwater to this day. So if you go to these gardens, you'll see the same kind of rock work, the same kind of contour building and farming, and really just having a broad knowledge of the landscape and how water flows and where it flows, and realizing that you need that extra little to do that work of building these rock water harvesting. It makes it so that our ancestors were able to have just that extra little bit of water down in the valleys, which is what was needed to feed thousands of people, you know, back then. And again, it was probably tedious community work of baskets of dirt, passing up baskets of rocks. We literally would have lines of 50 people passing up one rock at a time to put a lot of these stones up on place. And that's the same way that I'm sure it was done back then. So up here is the back parking lot behind Espanola City Hall. And this is what we would call an urban watershed, because all of the rainwater that hits that parking lot then drains. This is the main drainage point off the parking lot onto the garden. And so before we built this garden, the city was having to come in every year with heavy machinery to repair the erosion damage from the rainwater running off this slope, which was just a straight, steep slope at the time. We hadn't done the swales yet, the terracing wasn't done. So when we're working on this garden, there was actually like a 6-7 foot trench right here with like caution tape around it, because the rainwater had done so much damage. And then with the way they were solving it with machinery was to go through the length of the slope, scrape off all of the vegetation to fill in the trench every year. So this was a really poor, abused slope that where the plants were not able to flourish and do their work of erosion control on this landscape. So now we're harvesting that rainwater to grow an edible medicinal garden. We solved the city's problems of having to fix erosion damage every year. And it's indigenous technology of dryland farming, where all the water that comes down is filtered off into this top swale. And the swales are built on contour, which is where if you see those contour maps with all the little lines, those are where the land is level. And so you can find contour on a slope by using an A-frame or a laser level. And it's really simple technology. And what you do is you mark those areas where the land is level, you dig a swale, which is the trench, and pile what you dig out next to it, which is the berm. And then you plant in that swale. And that's how you're using that rainwater to grow things. So the whole garden, this is made up of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 swales going all the way down. So water that is caught on this top swale percolates down to the fruit trees, even at the bottom. So, and then if there's any overflow, it will go there's drainage points to go to the next level. So up here is where we've also done myco and bioremediation work. Because before we started, we also did soil sampling to make sure there wasn't any contamination issues of concern. But again, the state and federal standards of cleanup or a clean environment are not my standards. They might not protect my body type or cultural way of life or my children, based on state standards of, well, they say it's clean. But yeah, they said there wasn't any heavy metals or anything, but we still want to be careful. So when you see a rain event in a parking lot and you see the rain puddles and they have the little rainbow slicks, and that's just from like oil drips from cars and things like that. So parking lot water isn't the cleanest water. And so we were aware of that and designing this top level as like a remediation layer for the garden. So part of the plan in the works is to have a row of sunflowers and amaranth, which help to pull toxins out of the soil or heavy metals from the soil. And also we've had a couple of myco-remediation workshops with another artist named Clayton Brascoupe, who's done amazing work along with the work of building off the work of Peter McCoy. So myco-remediation is using mycelium and fungus to help clean contaminants from the soil. And so we had one workshop with youth when doing community education around a chromium plume at Los Alamos National Labs that's in our aquifer, where we were trying to get the community to advocate for using these techniques to do cleanup at contaminated sites there. And so part of that workshop is we showed people how to make mycelium bricks, and we researched that oyster mushrooms are the best at cleaning up things from oil and gas. And so oil spills and things like that, oyster mushrooms work the best at. They basically eat it, and the only waste you have is the fruiting body, which is the mushroom itself. So it's a lot easier to get rid of a barrel of mushrooms than it is to remove tons and tons of soil that's contaminated. And so we really need to start looking at these natural technologies when it comes to cleanup of pollution or things like that. So we inoculated the mycelium bricks. Folks took them home, grew them for a month, and then later on we had another workshop. We were talking about the water issues, and then we came up on this slope and buried the mycelium bricks in the swale. So again, thinking about these systems and that go on underneath the soil and above ground, it really pushes back on the whole kind of Darwinian theory of evolution, of that survival of the fittest narrative, which I don't necessarily agree with. It seems to support hierarchy and dominance and kind of a lot of harmful things that we're dealing with today. And so looking at, you know, the lessons from mycelium networks, it really shows that the most sustainable systems are actually cooperative and collaborative in nature. So one of our elders at Table Women United, Kathy Sanchez, she does a presentation called the Two World Harmony Butterfly Model. And it's, you know, talking a lot about multiculturalism and, you know, even though we live on one world and face a lot of the same issues, there's a lot of different strengths from the different cultures. So not all of Western science and technology is destructive. And so, you know, the things around agriculture and farming, like, so this is just I just wanted to show your drip system because that's how we're using Western technology. Which actually has its roots like way far back too in indigenous technology, so I don't know how accurate that is. But the whole garden is set up on this just because everything we planted was so small, little 5-gallon buckets. This will eventually get phased out once everything gets established, but it was really important when things were still babies to have this system going. And even during our hot months, in combination with the rainwater, that we do have this as a backup. So yeah, there's like 6 different zones for watering throughout the garden, so it's all on drip also. So we're at the northern side of the Healing Foods Oasis. This is our amaranth beds, and we've been really blessed to work with farmers from Guatemala and Rabinal with the Quechua Lu Madre Tierra Association, and also with the Garden's Edge in Albuquerque, who we've been in relations with for, gosh, 11 years now also, and working to rematriate this really beautiful plant and relative of the amaranth. And you know, it's also talking about justice issues and the importance of how our food and seed sovereignty came to be in this place. It was through a lot of relations with our southern indigenous relatives. So it's very problematic to have militarized borders when it comes to our food and seed sovereignty. And then that relations of trading seed, trading knowledge, trading medicine, trading sharing in ceremony with our relatives from the south is hindered, or even to this point where it's violent, as a result of like the immigration policing and militarization of our borders. And so this plant is a beautiful example of what's possible to just feed the world, to solve so much malnutrition problems in the world. It's what's also known as superfood. It contains all the complete proteins, complex B vitamins, super good for mental health and brain function. You can eat the whole plant, but it's mostly grown for its grain, which can be roasted and eaten that way, or once it's roasted, ground into a flour and drunk as an atole or a flour substitute. So this is being used in a lot of maternal infant health programs where children in Guatemala are having malnutrition or nutrient deficiency issues, and I think everybody's suffering from nutrient deficiency on some level, because a lot of the food that we're growing doesn't contain the nutrients because of monoagriculture or lots of different reasons with big farming. So this plant has so much potential that we all need to be cultivating on a larger scale and really eating. It's interesting effect that if you are deficient, sometimes when you first eat this plant or the atole, you might get like really fatigued, and that's just because your body's not used to having nutrition or like vitamins. And so if you eat this plant and you get like really tired, it's probably because you needed it. But we've been doing workshops with this plant, how to plant it, how to grow it, how to harvest it and cook with it. We've been doing that every year here at the garden. It's one of our our well-attended, like really beautiful workshops that's close to my heart is working with this plant. It's one of my favorite plants to work with, if I had to name one. So, you know, even though this garden is a perennial garden, we do have these beds where that have some annual foods that we are planting here and there. So it is teaching about both annuals and perennial plants. And then again, when you're growing annuals, it's always good to have those perennial things. If you're going to be using that water, might as well grow things that are going to come back on their own anyway. So like we have the amaranth, but in the middle we have the wild plums. So, you know, it's just like, well, if you're going to be using water in an area, be growing those things that are going to be there for the long term, just as a way to conserve water and utilize it to its fullest. So this is our relative Yerba Mansa. Usually grows in wetland areas. Very good anti-inflammatory plant. Antibacterial. It's kind of one of those good for everything plants that if you could like chew on one of these leaves every day, it would prevent a lot of things. So I like to suck on these leaves. And we're here kind of in the middle of the garden. And this is where some of the fruit trees are. This is the other end of the pollinator habitat. You can see we're doing some work with mulching. Where a lot of these pathways and things we did put a layer of thick cardboard underneath the mulch and the pathways as an alternative to the black plastic that usually goes under paths, because the cardboard just turns into dirt and it's a good organic form of weed suppression. And so this is the area we want to fix up and beautify because it has that old headgate for the acequia that used to flood this part, so they would flood irrigate the part. And now that acequia runs under this kind of rice grass soil right here and then comes out the other side. But really honor our relations with land-based people and acequia communities. And then so all of our fruit trees are planted in what we call a fruit tree guild. And so what that means is that you have the fruit tree, but then surrounding it are beneficial plants that help the tree grow. And again, it's more of that cooperative, collaborative systems of building community, where some of the plants might have a big taproot, like these guys, which keep the soil loose. They might attract pollinators for the tree. They might attract beneficial insects or for pest control. Maybe they will are nitrogen fixing plants that help to give the tree food. And so that's called a guild, or like also like with the Three Sisters model, a milpa, but with a fruit tree. So there's a lot of different ways you can look at companion planting, and again, it's a lesson to people that we were never meant to go through life alone. We're always meant to be in community with each other. You never see a plant growing by itself. It's always in relation to other plants and features in stone. Stone is also alive and holds great energy. A lot of the slope, there's a lot of stonework. And so even on this middle slope, I was talking about our relations with our southern indigenous relatives. And so on this side, we have the avanyu, which is our water serpent. That's in stone going this way from the north, and then coming from the south is the feathered serpent, which is another iteration of the avanyu. And that represents southern and northern indigenous peoples coming together to share knowledge the way we always have since time immemorial, and the importance of preserving that for the benefit of everyone, again, because we hold so much And it's important that we have open communication and open borders, open right to travel, and the freedom to travel. Because that's part of our sustainability in this place, is the ability to do that. So a lot of symbology, even just in the slope. Anywhere you see rock work, it's solar power, it's holding energy, it's helping another way of conserving water, because moisture gets harvested through the air from stone. So that's another important dryland technique, where you could even do pebble mulching, or building these kind of rock berms or rock towers as a way to harvest extra moisture. This is some more annual beds of like tomatoes and squash and corn and peppers that we planted this year. This is a work in progress, which is kind of a public seating area / auditorium, where again, for thinking of the space as an outdoor educational space where you could have gatherings, presentations under the shade pergola, which has some beautiful grapes growing underneath it, and those are actually the only seedless plant in the whole garden. And we picked a seedless variety because it was right next to the children's playground, the young children's playground, and we wanted them to not have to worry about little seeds if they started picking those grapes. You know, thinking about dryland farming, food and seed sovereignty, it's really important that, you know, we did talk about water conservation and water harvesting as a response to climate change adaptation. But also it's really important that we're growing out our seeds and our plants in that changing climate on an annual basis, so that there too are also adapting to the changing environment. You know, we're getting a lot of hotter temperatures in the summer, drier periods, or even periods of extreme rainfall. So a lot of the farmers are seeing these changes, and seeds are really crucial to our genetic memory that we share with them, and that how they remember weather patterns, different kinds of environmental factors that happen through the season, that all get stored in their memory. And so in that regard, seeds are relatives in that they've always shared these experiences, good and hard, along with the people of this place. So all the plants in this garden, you can also find the seeds at the Espanola Healing Food Seed Library, which is right next door at the Espanola Public Library. And it started out with just kind of seed banking at the Table Women United office. And we would, in exchange for farmers donating some of their heirloom seeds, we would work in their fields. And we did that for a couple of years until we accumulated a little bit of seeds from this area. And then now that's grown into the seed library, which opened up in March of 2020, before all this hit. And so part of this garden is also like harvesting seed at the end of the year, so that it could, any plants that you find here, you can find seed for it at the library, as well as other vegetables, other crops that farmers in the region are donating to the library as well. And all that means is that people can check out seeds the way they check out books. So they can borrow, I think, up to 10 packets a season, and hopefully with the agreement that they bring back either as much or more as they borrowed, to just keep replenishing that seed, but really encouraging people to grow out that seed every year and learn how to save seed. That is a response to the genetic engineering concerns that we have and cross-pollination of our crops, that we're teaching the community about the importance of our heirloom seeds, and that because only our seeds are going to be the strongest and most suited to this region that we're in. And so it's really, it can be really harmful when we're bringing in seeds from other places, GMO seeds, that can contaminate our heirloom seeds, or that maybe even aren't suited to this region and aren't going to do that good. And so if we do get hit with extreme drought, it's more likely that our crops that are adapted to this climate are going to make it and actually produce some seed for the following year. So there's a big movement right now and resurgence of people planting their gardens and doing their backyard gardens, and I think that's really, really important in these times, especially in this time of pandemic, that, you know, we might be facing food shortages, and we've already seen that a little bit. So the more people can reconnect with those agricultural traditions, you know, and it's also a response to the environmental concerns we have with being Indigenous land-based people. It also sets us up for a lot of increased exposure to toxicity just because of our culture. So we fish, we hunt, we harvest the wild natural foods, the plant medicines, rainwater, we harvest clay for our potteries, which we eat off of. And so if we have being that we live next to nuclear facilities, a lot of these impacts, it's kind of a double-edged thing, because on one hand, the way that we're going to combat these things with our own bodies is to make sure we're as healthy as possible, that we're eating our traditional foods, that we're outdoors, that's what's gonna make us healthy and strong. And getting that good nutrition. And then on the other hand, it sets us up for possible illness as a result of chronic exposure to these contaminants over long periods of time. So it's cumulative and multiple exposure impacts. So not just to maybe radionuclides, but also like chemicals or things like that we're getting from a lot of different sources. So we really advocate for what's the preventative things we can do to make our immune system strong, to make our spirit strong, mental health strong, and it really is working with these plants and our seeds. And despite all of the years of colonial violence that our people have gone through, these 3 waves of colonialism here in New Mexico, first with Spain, then with Mexico, and now with the United States, our ancestors made sure to pass on this knowledge of seeds and agriculture to the people as the most important thing that we know how to do. So we have a big responsibility to carry that on, just for the well-being of everybody, and as a really good form of resilience and resistance, to keep passing on these things they've been trying to take away from us. And it's always been going on. We've always maintained these traditions. It's nothing new that's been happening here in the valley, but it needs to happen on a larger scale with families, and as a result of a lot of issues also that are more economic, where people aren't able to maybe work their family land as much as they used to in the past. But despite any kind of political differences, I think it's one thing all people can unite around is protection of land and water, seeds, and everything that benefits those healthy systems. Because that's ultimately what gives us our freedom, is our ability to feed ourselves.
Definitely not going back there.
Careful, there's a branch getting my arm right there. Right there. Okay, so doing some mulching today. We just connected the drip. And another dryland technique is really heavy mulching. So this is a free resource you can get from lumber yards. They usually give it away. And it's just wood mulch. And everywhere in the garden we have it about at least a foot thick around the plants. And that's to hold in moisture. It acts as a sponge. for the roots to grow around. And just, yeah, these desert conditions, it's really crucial that you do heavy mulching if you want the plants to not have to have so much water to make it. And when you do mulch, you don't want to cover too much around. You want to leave a little bit of breathing room around the plant, but everywhere else around it. And then it also helps with weed suppression, so you're not having to go through and pull out the weeds a lot.
Hi, good morning. My name is Frere Marie, and I use they them pronouns. And I'm an employee here at the Healing Foods Oasis in Española, and this is my second year. Oh my gosh, there goes a hawk carrying a dead bird all the way out. Awesome. Yeah, so this is my second year working at the garden, and as an employee of the garden, you know, I believe in plant relationships. I believe in more than human kinship and all these things, and also am navigating this garden space as a guest on Tewa land. I'm born and raised in New Mexico, grew up partially in Santa Fe and partially in Española. But I'm not ancestrally from here, and so a lot of the things that I think about in terms of interacting with this space is what does it mean to be a guest and to try and be in a kinship relationship with land, which is something that for myself as a queer and trans individual, oftentimes, you know, the social reality is challenging, but the relationship with place and the relationship with land is oftentimes one's best ally, and then also what it means to interact at this time and place where I think there's a lot of consumption of land-based knowledge. There's a lot of consumption that is out of relationship with place by a lot of different people, and that being part of you know, patriarchy, white supremacy, and capitalism. But in particular for me, based on my intersections of identity, to kind of like think about those things deeply and show up. And I think that I had sort of like my own personal transition in my life where I was like, if I'm going to use my physical labor and I'm going to use these different kinds of things, I want it to be one, in service of, in particularly the Indigenous women in my life who are doing things that are based in community well-being, but also, and these are big buzzwords, and I also don't want to use them flippantly too, because it's easy to like talk big, but also like life is complicated. But this idea of reciprocity and good relation, and so that looks a lot of different ways. I think that there are consent-based practices. There are ways of like, you know, being ready to have difficult conversations. There's resource sharing, and I think that a lot of people who are guests in places have to be conscious of needing to be in an active relationship of even reparations with the histories of colonialism, and that also that there's no clear formula, right? I think there's a unruliness to life, and that's also like part of even looking at systems-based agriculture and things like that, is that there's all these beautiful networks of relation and being, but there's also an aspect of unruliness that has to do with agency and has to do with like the complexities of interpersonal relationships. And I think that we can approach place and land as a teacher in that way. And also that, yeah, we have to really look at what is sharing versus appropriation, especially when the power dynamics are what they are given colonization and given the political realities that we live. And so there's no formula for that. That's really based in the dynamicism of being in relation. So yeah, so there's just like a lot that goes into it, but at the end of the day, it's easy to like talk big and romanticize about that. And you know, we're in a garden in Española, and it's dry and it's hot, and it's not romantic. It's like, you know, some days it's like really hot and boring, and some days it's like really great, and it's where you want to be. And I think that not romanticizing, but also investing in like the, you know, I don't know, just the part of showing up is, I think, a really big part of all of this, especially when it comes to things that can be seen as cultural knowledge or interpersonal knowledge. It's really easy to place things on pedestals and romanticize, but you know, the day-to-day is pretty not romantic.
My name is Peña. This is gonna be like my second summer working at the Healing Foods Oasis, and I guess one thing about this place is there's a lot of like berries that you can eat here. It's one of like my favorite things. Yeah, there's like strawberries, blackberries, and all kinds of stuff. So.
We need to make sure that Indigenous communities are healthy and whole and restored before we ask too much to share this knowledge with the outside world. Because there is, well, I guess to quote Dr. Greg Cajete, who is a scholar from my pueblo, Santa Clara, who talks about Indigenous peoples as an indicator species of their environment. And if you look at the health of any Indigenous community, you can usually gauge the health of the environment surrounding that community. And so the statistics for Indigenous nations, reservations, even in urban areas of Indigenous Black people of color communities, the health stats are not great. And that's a direct result of colonization and that intentional forced removal of the peoples from the land. Because we have a way of, we meaning Indigenous peoples have a way of stewarding, of caregiving our land-based relations to take care of them in perpetuity. And that, you know, Creator planted us in these places for a reason. And now, instead of us managing these lands, we have the Bureau of Land Management, we have national parks, we have National Forest Service. These are all kind of took over that caregiving. And as a result, we now have massive public lands being auctioned off for fracking and oil and gas leases, rampant forest fires, you know, these kind of things that we were really good at. But also, we were never meant to be siloed from our environment. We're a living part of our ecosystems, an integral part of our ecosystems. And when you separated us from that environment through colonization, that also put the decline of these natural systems and started that process. So I don't know if, I hope that's clear, and we can, I'm happy to answer any more questions about that, but just to elaborate more on what I mean by the importance of these movements for land back with Indigenous people, the importance of restoring Indigenous communities with what was stolen over time. You know, this could only serve to benefit everybody. When we start to center Indigenous people, Indigenous pregnant women and pregnant people, if they're protected, everybody is protected just by default. So really want to ask everyone to advocate in that way and to really look at our decisions, our policies, our relation building, center Indigenous peoples, and it's what needs to happen right now.
Okay, well, thank you, Beata, for that amazing guidance. We're gonna transition now into our Q&A session. And so folks, if you still would like to ask a question or especially to vote for questions, because that really helps us narrow down what to ask, that would be really great for you to do right now. But I think we can just jump right in. I'm gonna make everybody a host so that we can see everyone here while we're answering our questions. Beata, I've just made you the host so that you can start your video. And then Clayton, I'm gonna make you host as well. Okay, well, I guess we can start with our questions. Are you good to go, Beata? Okay. So the first question that we have here is from Lotus, and they would like to know how you recommend sourcing indigenous herb seeds or indigenous seeds in general.
I think to go just in your backyard and where you live and look at what's growing around your house. And learn how to identify those plants just in your immediate vicinity. I think go start making relations with the indigenous peoples of your area and communities in your area. And real life, long-term relational goals, just walking the land, seeing what you can, if you're curious about something, trying to idea it. But there's a lot of information out there that you can look at. So as far as what's regional to the area or what's native to that area. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Okay.
And you can unmute if you verify maybe.
Yeah, maybe if you have anything to follow up from your question, you can just share in the chat. And then we can make sure to get everybody's questions answered. So I think we
but the sourcing piece.
Oh yeah, there's the sourcing piece.
Just to know the sourcing piece. Yeah, if there's any indigenous owned seed producers, go to them first. And if you can harvest it yourself, that's better. And grow the plants you want to use yourself, because a lot of plants are getting over harvested and endangered as a result of commercialization. So yeah.
Okay, thank you, Beata. Next question we have is, do you have any advice or comments for Indigenous youth who are starting agricultural projects or community gardens in their community? Or any advice to those folks on their learning journey?
Oh, just keep going at it. It makes me so happy when youth are interested in these projects, and don't give up. Talk to your elders. Ask for what you need, whatever support that is, whether it's spiritual, emotional, physical. Don't feel like you got to kind of unlearn the individualized Western education, unfortunately, and start to relearn these kind of communal ways of knowing, and that intergenerational way of learning when it comes to traditional knowledge. And yeah, if you put it in prayer, and then seek out elders as much as possible, and start talking to them. They're just waiting to be asked, trust me. Yeah. And bring them a gift before you ask them. Ask with respect. Bring them an offering.
That's a good piece. Thanks for sharing that aspect. It's so important to take into consideration. So Caitlin would like to know, when you're creating a seed bank, you mentioned the concern of cross-pollination. When you're taking in seed donations from other community members and growers in the area, how do you monitor or test that those seeds have not been affected?
So right now we're not doing testing for seeds. I think that's something I'm still learning about as a response to cross-pollination from GE varieties. But you know, we are, I guess, fortunately in our community, we're a pretty tight-knit farming community. Our farming network is like small and tight-knit. We know all the farmers. And so it really is kind of an honor system. It's clear in our literature and pamphlets and guidelines that we're seeking heirloom seeds and what that means and defining it clearly for the community. Sometimes we get donations of kind of commercialized seed packets, and then it's like going through and like getting rid of the ones that have the little patent number, you know, written on the back of the seed packets. But I think, yeah, we don't have a lot of capacity to do scientific testing and sampling of our seeds. I think that's an ongoing conversation, you know, as far as keeping traditional knowledge within traditional parameters of how we look at seeds. And I've heard a lot of talk of like, oh, we got to like patent our own seeds, we got to do these things, but then that's, or same thing with like rights of nature. It's like, well, then you're imposing these systems into man-made law versus natural law. So I think like we haven't had any concerns yet with the seed we've been receiving and getting donations from, but I think just having really clear guidelines and materials and literature at the seed library, which we have, and it's open source. If you want to use any of the language or literature pamphlets from our seed library, we're open to sharing that with folks. But yeah, it's a concern, and I don't have the complete answer to like that protections other than enacting GE free zones in our communities and really pushing back for the long game around protecting our seeds.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue into the next question that we have, which is that you know, wondering of how do you then protect your seed sovereignty and to protect your seeds when there are so many threats to them around us. So would you say that that would be your answer to that question, to, you know, push hard for the GMO free zones?
Yeah, GE free zones, GMO labeling on our foods, reparations for farmers who have lost their farms or seeds or livelihoods through getting sued. We're part of the New Mexico Food and Seed Sovereignty Alliance that TANAFA and the Sequia Association were part of the beginnings of that, drafting Food and Seed Sovereignty Declaration, which all kinds of resolutions and state memorials and things have passed in our state. I think because we have 22 sovereign nations in our state, that's why we've been able to resist a lot of like the seed preemption laws, but there is some research being done in our state. You know, I think GE alfalfa is already on the loose, but I think making these resolutions into actual city and county ordinances and tribal constitutional law, something that has more legal teeth, is the next step for that foundational work. And yeah, there's been some really exciting precedents set in other counties in the nation that have passed GE free zones that I think we need to replicate and revive that, put that movement nationwide. It's going to be hard, but we really need a revolutionary food movement in that respect. I don't know, Clayton, if you have anything to add about that.
I just mentioned on the, I guess the chat panel that the TANAFA has a lot of those tribal resolutions that have been passed. We have the original document that the New Mexico Seed Alliance had drafted a Declaration of Seed Sovereignty. It was instituted in 2006. I believe next week we're actually going to be covering a little bit more about specifically about seeds. And if people want to know more, they could hopefully have the time to be a part of next week's panel also. But yeah, the seeds thing is critically important.
So Beata, if people want to see those pamphlets that you mentioned, how could they access those?
I believe they're on TWU's website. If you look up the Seed Library Project, Espanola Healing Food Seed Library, or email me, beata@tablewomenunited.org. I'm happy to send them to you.
Okay. And yeah, everybody, we with those links that we shared earlier to the organizations who are part of this presentation, Table Women United is one of those links. And so you can, that's the website where you might be able to find those pamphlets, and also Beata's contact information. Next question that we have is, how would you suggest introducing oneself as a non-Indigenous person to the local Indigenous community to learn and build relationships?
Same way you would introduce yourself to anybody. That's it.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah, and just do that homework before you want to work with Indigenous-led organizations or communities. Like, make sure you're doing the anti-oppression trainings and the cultural sensitivity work trainings with your org. Make sure you're actively doing anti-racism work within your personal and organizational work. That you are coming to learn about the work they're already doing before, coming in with agendas, or lift up the work that's already happening in Indigenous communities, or that they're wanting to do, and advocate for that work as much as possible. So coming in wanting to just get to know folks, sometimes even just like, hey, Tribal Council, I'm a guest on your land. Thank you for, I acknowledge you that this is your place, your sacred place. I want to align myself with the values of this place. How can I help support your community? If you're interested in like that kind of help, but there's a lot that can come with thinking deeply about the values of the place you are living on as a guest. And yeah, don't be shy. We're very welcoming communities. Trust me.
Okay, so we have a few questions about the Healing Foods Oasis now. Lisa would like to know if there are any concerns regarding chemical leaching from pressure-treated lumber in the wood chips that you were using for mulching.
No, not that. Though a lot of the stuff that those were shavings from like vigas and things like that. That's not really from like particle board, or it's just from like making the actual cuttings. So yeah, it's we got it from a local lumber yard. They have like a mountain of that stuff, and so we'd have to just pay for trucking. We would get dump trucks of that stuff delivered to the garden. And you can go on your own truck if you don't want to pay for that, but it takes a little bit more trips. But I haven't had any concerns with where we're sourcing that. But yeah, it's like if you get from like that red stuff, the red bark that you can find in like hardware stores, and those are with anything that comes in a bag, you're gonna want to make sure it's not chemically treated.
Okay, yeah, I'm like thinking, how do we explain for the folks who are not from New Mexico what a viga is?
Oh yeah.
But I think the summary is that
For
there are
your help.
really wonderful woodworkers in our community here, and so maybe that would be a good place to source if that's something that you're looking for, is the woodworkers in your community. Okay, so have you worked with beneficial insects in the garden, or have you noticed a return of beneficial insects to the space?
Yes, absolutely. I remember when I was first learning about Indigenous sustainable design and going to Ko'o Roxanne's house. And I remember her saying, like, when you do these gardens, you're inviting life back into a space. And that's really true. So all kinds of birds, snakes, bugs, lizards. I've seen even the predatory birds, because now we got the groundhogs, which I'm like, I haven't seen too much. Like, I think we made a little groundhog paradise at that site too, but now the falcons are coming and the hawks, and Frere in that video was like, oh, look at the hawk carrying some. So yeah, and even the neighborhood pets, like now we have all these cats that come hunting lizards in the garden, so that like, and the owners will come calling for them, and so it's pretty beautiful seeing life come back into the space that was just completely bare dirt and maybe a few ant piles here and there, but now it's really flourishing.
Great. Yeah, I mean, it's food for everybody, right? Including the wildlife. Oh, this is an
Yeah, and even with the insects that eat stuff, like it's just a little bit. They don't eat a lot. You can get them.
Okay, this one's exciting to me because I was really lucky to be there at the Healing Foods Oasis for, it might have been one of the well, it was that workshop on creating the mycelium bricks. And so Lily is wondering if you can share any resources on mycoremediation and how somebody could adopt that technique into their own garden.
Yeah, this is like something it's an ongoing thing that I want to continue building on, is the myco and bioremediation strategies. So keeping in mind that mycelium by itself isn't necessarily the best, but mycelium in collaboration with a restored, healthy, natural system as a whole is what's ideal. So like, yes, you can put these mycelium bricks in the ground, but you also have to make sure that all these other elements are strong as well for the results you want to see. So Peter McCoy has it's called Radical Mycology, is a really good book that's out there. If you want to look up Clayton Brascoupe, she's doing amazing art ecology projects about remediation and land restoration, water restoration. There's different this is a whole other workshop in itself, so I'll try to maybe we can do that down the road, which would be exciting. I've had requests for that, but there's different kinds of mycoremediation depending on the fungi you're using. So yeah, it's looking at, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's been a lot of studies out there already about which mushrooms remediate whatever contaminant you're looking for. So I think like that approach of the sampling and like whatever your concerns are around pollution, like identifying what it is you're dealing with first. Or if you have an idea of the production in your area and the environmental releases from those facilities into your area. So kind of getting a sense of what you're dealing with and then researching which mushrooms are best for the contaminant of concern. And then, yeah, it's really simple. Like you need a pasteurization still to like pasteurize your straw or your sawdust or whatever you're using for the inoculation. And then I've had to order, corn cobs You can use wood stumps, old trees, like, yeah, there's a lot of different things. And so we used, I think, sawdust. We ordered the inoculation kit, mixed it a little bit with the bags, and then you just let it sit there for a month. I didn't have to do anything. In a dark place, made that it never dried out. I never really white, and you can poke holes and start growing mushrooms to eat, or you can bury them in your soil. Where we live, because it's a desert, we didn't really see too many of the fruit of the mushrooms popping out because I think it was too hot. But there is that mycelium spreading underground. So that makes me feel good that that work is happening. But we're also making sure there's a lot of soil microbes and the earthworms and roly-polies and all those things that also help to remediate soil. On that top layer of the garden isn't kind of the edible piece. It's more just like the shrubbery and wild grasses and things like that. And so, like, keeping in mind, putting some distance between that initial contact from contaminants to what you're actually eating. But it's something you can do in your backyard and it's not going to hurt. Again, it would be nice to do these pilot projects with before and after sampling with the scientific studies. But it's just something that's good when talking about environmental violence as something you can show your community that they can do if they're worried. And we do want to do more of that work for sure. Did that answer your question? Or if anyone wants to jump in?
I think that covers what was asked. Maybe you could touch base real quick on, because I know in that top layer you have both mycoremediates and bioremediates engaged. Maybe, I know this is like a whole entire other conversation, but maybe if you could just touch really quick on the plants that you have engaged in that work as well, that would be useful for folks to hear.
Okay. So yeah, making sure your wild grasses are plentiful for the soil health, having that rock work to slow down the water. And so if there is pollution coming onto a site, that it's being contained and like slowing the migration. Sunflowers and amaranth are my favorites, I think. And even a lot of the sticker plants. So like letting the ragweed and goat heads kind of, well, maybe not the goat heads, but you know, whatever, like nature, if there's a disturbed site, nature is going to put what plants need to be there on their own. And I've really noticed that if you just kind of help that process along, and if you're patient to wait a year or two to really build on remediating a site before you're growing food on it, that could be worth the wait. So yeah, I think those are the two that I'm really passionate about. I know planting a bunch of sunflowers and just growing sunflowers for a couple years, that soil is going to be top notch, you know, at the end of that season.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing about that. It's so interesting to me, and you know, I think everybody in their own corner of whichever land they're on right now is facing some sort of situation in which that's a needed, you know, part of their agricultural efforts. So I'm really, really happy that you were able to share a little bit about what that work looks like at the Healing Foods Oasis. So we have time for about one more question. And so I want to share this one with you because I think it's really important. Are there programs for people to help out at the Healing Foods Oasis and to learn the different techniques that are being shared there?
Yeah, so we have, you know, during the summer, I think is nice because we have a lot of youth groups. Hopefully we'll be able to return to in-person gatherings. We have a few videos. I think the Indigenous Sustainable Communities Design course that Clayton puts on every year is awesome if you're able to attend that for the Indigenous folks on this call. Happens in July. And then you go on site to a lot of different places and do that reciprocal work exchange in exchange for knowledge. I'm always open to having groups come, maybe not now while we're still kind of in quarantine. But and I think, yeah, just look in your community for like any places that you can start doing some restoration work, on the sites where you live. I think if everyone's doing this in their backyards that's close to them, that's really worthwhile. But the garden is open, it's in a public park, so it's accessible to everybody to come and visit anytime on your own. And if you're knowledgeable, feel free to like start pulling some weeds or making an area pretty, just come and apply your knowledge. But yeah, we're kind of at a standstill still as far as like having groups out, but hopefully in the future.
Okay, well, so we're gonna I'll share again the links to everyone's organizational websites, and you can go again to the Tewa Women United website to learn more about the Healing Foods Oasis. And we're also gonna include your Instagram handle so everybody can go and check out all of the beautiful pictures and videos that are there of the garden and all of the happenings within it. But yeah, thank you so much, Beata, for presenting and sharing with us today. Everybody, we all really appreciate it. And I think we're gonna
Facebook page.
Oh yes, and your Facebook page. Yes, we'll link that for sure. And tomorrow we'll be sending out an email to everybody who's registered with the link to the recording of this presentation, and we'll include all of those links in that email as well to make them easy for you to find and to access. And I think we are gonna start.
And one more thing
and maybe Clayton, did you want to take over and talk about who we have featured next in our webinar series?
Sure. Actually, I guess somewhere in this whole process today, we chose a couple of people for our door prizes, and we'll be contacting you on those, and we'll be mailing those out as soon as we get the contact information. There was a lot of questions on seeds for this for Beata, and we're going to be covering focus more on seeds on this next week in this series. And I believe we have confirmed with Rowan White to be the presenter. It follows basically the same format. So hopefully everybody can return and get more. And I'm hoping to develop this a little bit further about seeds, because that is our foundation of our sustainability. We have control over the seeds. We have control over our health and our diet and our communities. It's actually, I considered it, seeds being our wealth and also our health at the same time. I posted my email for the Farmers Association, and we can hopefully provide a little bit more information around seeds, especially now. I hope everyone's questions were at least addressed today. If you just are in the Espanola area, it'd be great for you guys to see it firsthand and make those observations in different times of the year. It's wintertime here. I don't know if Espanola got snow. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But it'd be great to see with the snow. Also in the spring, summer, and fall, And if you're thinking about doing something similar, you have to make those observations throughout the season to be successful. So that's it from me for today, and I thank everybody for being in attendance. I thank Beata, I think Colleen, Kaylee, and everyone else that's involved in this whole series.
Great. Well, thank you again, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Beata, Kutawaha, and we'll see everybody next week, hopefully. Okay.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
See you.